Hello and welcome everyone to this episode of the Kianistan podcast. Joining us today, we have Dr. Mariam Mufti from the University of Waterloo. Mariam is an associate professor of political science. Hello and welcome, Mariam. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Mariam, could you maybe let us know a little bit more about what you do and what your background is?
So I am from Pakistan originally and I'm currently based in Canada. I'm a comparativist political scientist by training from Johns Hopkins University. And when I was working on my PhD at Johns Hopkins, one of the key questions that animated my research was, why Pakistan remains an unstable democracy and why it is unable to transition to a democracy, right? Like why is this country so susceptible to military intervention? And that's really the work that has driven most of my research and all the work that I do on Pakistan. But of course, given Pakistan's geopolitical importance to the world and also in the region of South Asia, it is critical to pay attention to international politics as well. I will also say that one of the reasons why Pakistan susceptible to military intervention is really the disputed territory of Kashmir between India and Pakistan, which is what we're talking about today. So from that perspective, understanding the roots of political instability in Pakistan are critical to understanding Pakistan's international position in the world.
Thank you for that. Yes, really useful to know. I think you're absolutely right. Pakistan, I think since its inception, has faced challenges that maybe has led us to the path where we're on now. And adding to the complication are things like Kashmir, but also like the kind of trouble that we had for such a long time in Afghanistan. And then we have the border with Iran, which was pretty stable. We had our differences at times. But right now, it's not a very kind of a stable time. It's troubling time for Iran, obviously, but it makes it a troubling time for Pakistan as well. So when I requested you to join us and you kindly agreed, I wanted to talk to you about the conflict that took place, military conflict that took place between India and Pakistan in May, which was only like a month ago, 4 weeks ago maybe, but it seems like a lifetime ago now. So I was wondering maybe we can talk about that, but we can also maybe put that into like the context of the region and also how things may impact Pakistan, things that are going on in Iran, and maybe also how you see Pakistan, what role Pakistan can play in this conflict that's going on between Iran and Israel. So to start with, what were your thoughts of that conflict that did take place between India and Pakistan in May? How it escalated from a terrorist attack inside India and then escalated to like a full-on military conflict very quickly and with very little kind of diplomacy, direct diplomacy between the two countries. How did you see that all unfold?
I mean, it was a very unprecedented event, actually, in many ways, right? So if you think about all of the military conflagrations that have happened along the line of control since 1971, right? So if you're looking at 2016 in Uri, for example, or in 2019 in Pulwama Balakot, to now 2025 in Pahalgam, each conflagration has come with some degree of increased escalation. And Pahalgam certainly also escalated in a way that, was very, very surprising. So let's talk about some of those unprecedented things. The first is that Pahalgam was different because it led to the killing of 26 civilians. Pulwama in 2019 had actually resulted in the deaths of 40 Indian paramilitary soldiers. And so this time, because it was the death of civilians, it was likened to what had happened in Mumbai back in 2008. as opposed to what had happened back in 2019. So that was difference number one. The second thing that suddenly happened in this case was that India, instead of taking a pause before responding right away, instead of providing evidence of Pakistani culpability, just went ahead and laid the blame for the entire event at the Pakistani government's feet, saying that it was the Pakistani government that had resulted in this particular terrorist attack. Now, the Pakistani government, of course, rejected these allegations and said that it was a false flag operation to justify India's own coercive reaction. But also what happened in this particular instance was that the Indian government decided that instead of taking the diplomatic route, that it would right away go ahead and break all diplomatic ties, seize all trade, revoke the Indus Water Treaty that the two countries had signed back in the 1960s that shares the very, very precious waters of the Indus River between India and Pakistan. And right after that, and soon after that, it broke away from its military doctrine of not attacking Pakistani mainland and restricting its attacks on Pakistani occupied Kashmir. And this time round, they went ahead on May 7th and struck right at the Pakistani heartland of Punjab, claiming that the sites that it had struck were terrorist infrastructure sites, and that India was directly responding to what had happened in Kashmir. Now, of course, India had somewhat of a tactical win in that it proved that it had the capability of opening up a multi-theater front with Pakistan. But strategically, of course, we can talk about the fallout of what ensued. The third way in which Pahalgam is different is the misinformation, disinformation campaigns that happen on both sides. Right. So in response to the attacks, immediately on the Indian side, there were claims of so-called Indian victories and wins as a result of the military escalation. And then on the Pakistani side, similar responses. This also, by the way, added to the fog of war and created even more complexity because we couldn't really understand what exactly was happening. And then the fourth way in which Pahalgam is different is that we found ourselves in a situation where the international community had very little appetite to broker a negotiation between India and Pakistan. Right. We found ourselves in this very, very precarious moment where, thanks to conflicts happening in Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, President Donald Trump taking over power the first 100 days of his presidency, which have also created a lot of instability around the global economy. The international community had absolutely no appetite. And interestingly, the two countries that could have potentially come to broker peace between India and Pakistan, the United States and China, they didn't necessarily have the power to mediate. One, because India has always been very, very straight in saying that actually this is a bilateral conflict and that nobody else should interfere in the conversation between India and Pakistan. But second, because the United States and China both have conflicts of interest when it comes to in negotiating this particular conflict. So it was a very, very precarious situation.
Thank you so much for laying that out so nicely. Maybe touching upon that fourth point, I was actually surprised that Russia didn't step in and play a greater role. I know Russia's preoccupied with the war that's going on in Ukraine and is fully focused on that. But with the historic ties that Russia has had with India, as you say, because China would have found it difficult to play that role because of the close ties that it has with Pakistan. I think Russia at the moment would have been an ideal kind of a neutral broker. But it was interesting to see Russia's kind of interaction in that whole thing, because first of all, they didn't really take much of interest in the whole episode, but also straight afterwards, Russia came and did a pretty big investment in Pakistan on like a steel mill or something like that, which I've been watching a lot of Indian media, and they were very upset by that. I mean, I think they were upset by a number of things. That they didn't get the support, the international support that they were looking for from USA, from Russia, from any other country really, other than Israel and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, which is a government that they themselves don't even recognize at the moment. And obviously, I think a lot of that had to do with the way they approached the whole thing. Had they taken that pause that you mentioned, and had they gathered some information and took the international community into confidence before they took a step, I think they would have seen a different result. But maybe it was a bit of hubris. They thought they're a big, mighty country in the region. So whatever they do, the international community will back them up. Obviously, they're also part of the Quad that we can talk about later on. But I think the anticipation was that because of that and because of the relationship that they have with America, they'll get a greater legitimacy on an international level than what they got. So just looking at Russia, why do you think that Russia didn't play a greater role? Was it because Russia was preoccupied, or was it that Russia is maybe slightly distancing itself from India because India's getting closer to USA? And at the same time, I think if we look at the greater geopolitics in the region, where Russia's trying to establish a north-south corridor linking to the Middle East, where it may need a lot of support from Pakistan, do you think that played a role in Russia's decision to do what get involved as much as they did?
Right. So I don't want to speculate on the long game here, because it's very hard to speculate what exactly is going on in Putin's mind. But I will say certainly that Russia is preoccupied with Ukraine. Russia is, for that matter, preoccupied with everything that is happening in the world, just like all the other countries. But I think Russia also found itself caught between a rock and a hard place here, because with India's adventurism in Pakistan and China coming to support Pakistan in the way that it did, given that Chinese aircraft, Chinese military technologies, air defense systems, etc., were used by Pakistan in order to defend itself, I think, Russia's playing somewhat of a two-level game in South Asia, right, where it has to broker relations with Pakistan and India while also taking China into account. China, a country that it wants to continue to maintain a significant relationship with. I think that's point number one. I think point number two, of course, is Russia's involvement in the BRICS, right? That India is also involved in. And I think not necessarily stepping out of the bounds of what the BRICS mean to each other, and necessarily supporting India. I think Russia could also potentially be taking India at face value when India says this is a bilateral issue that India and Pakistan need to resolve and that all other countries should keep out. And I think that at this point, given that India is signaling to the rest of the world that it values its strategic autonomy above everything else, and that it will continue to strengthen its relationship with the United States while also maintaining relations with Iran, with Israel, with Russia, with China, and against Pakistan in this particular case. I mean, I think countries have to be very, very careful in the way that they approach the conflict. You're absolutely right to observe that, for India, it was a tactical success, really. Everything that happened from May 7th to about May 10th was a tactical success for India, because India did manage to penetrate Pakistan's air defense. It managed to very clearly show the weakness of Pakistan's air defense, because all of its strikes got through. It managed to hit Noor Khan base in Rawalpindi, which is very, very close to so from a tactical point of view, absolutely, it was a win. Absolutely, India knows that in any kind of conventional escalation, India outnumbers Pakistan in every which way. So if this war were to be more protracted, India almost certainly wins. It can last out Pakistan in a way that and Pakistan can defend itself in the short term, but over the long term, it really can't. Pakistan's economy doesn't allow for that. Okay, the strategically, however, India did not get the wins that it wanted. Right. So, for example, number one, India found absolutely no takers for the rhetoric that followed after Pelgam, except for perhaps Israel, as you noted. Second, there was, you know, it was seeking international disapproval. It didn't really get that from anybody, partially because I think the international community just did not have the appetite to pay attention to what was going on in Kashmir. And I think perhaps the biggest loss for India was the fact that the United States of America has rehyphenated its relationship to South Asia, in which it brings Pakistan, India back into the conversation instead of treating the United States relationship with India separately from the United States relationship with Pakistan. And for Donald Trump to say that he is now going to find a solution for both countries over Jammu and Kashmir goes completely against what India has always said, or what India's position has always been, that this is a bilateral issue that a third party should not be interfering in. Lastly, I think India just could not keep the focus on terrorism. It thought that it would get international disapproval for the so-called terrorism that was committed by the Pakistani government, except the focus very quickly shifted onto the fact that, well, this was going to be a nuclear crisis between two nuclear-powered states. It didn't end up being about terrorism at all. It didn't end up being about Kashmir at all. It was more about what India and Pakistan would do in order to counterbalance each other and reaffirm their capacity to deter one another. So that's not
So true. Hey there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Let me just take a moment to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is kindly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a complete A to Z Amazon account management service. So if you're looking to start an e-commerce business, or you already have a business that you want to take to the next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. Just for transparency purposes, let me also mention that WLC is a company that I personally created and am a director of. So when you get in touch with WLC, you will be speaking with directly myself or my team, and we very much look forward to speaking with you to see how we can serve your needs. Thank you. And with that said, let's get back to the episode. So true. I think historically, every time there has been a conflict between India and Pakistan, I think USA has always had to step in, but it's done so quietly and with back channels. So kind of India could save face and say, no, we will only deal with this issue unilaterally. But in reality, America's always stepped in. But on this occasion, because we have Trump and because he's got such a big mouth, he said that he stepped in to stop the war, but he didn't just stop saying it. He kept saying it. And I was watching on Indian media because they were counting the number of times that he's mentioned it on different occasions. I think they counted up to 12 or 13 times that he's mentioned it. The last time I checked, I think it's gone a bit more maybe. So I think that's quite interesting. And also talking about the fact terrorism, my personal feeling is that I think India has maybe miscalculated. Obviously, terrorism is a big issue for Pakistan, for India, for a lot of countries. But globally, I don't think terrorism is an issue that it used to be after September 11th, when USA started a war on terrorism, and then terrorism became everyone's problem. I think globally now, conflicts between nations is a bigger problem than terrorism is. What's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, but also the tensions that are growing between USA and China, and what's going on in Europe. I think terrorism is not the main focus for nations, and I think India's maybe kind of misread that whole thing, because even recently, Modi said that conventional wars is a thing of the past, and the thing to worry about now is terrorism. Whereas I think that's wrong. I think terrorism is a thing of the past, and the thing to worry about now is conventional wars. How do you see that?
Well, I mean, India is using the word terrorism, but essentially what it's talking about is Pakistani proxies acting on Indian soil against the Indian state, right? And what country in the world does not have proxies, right? Isn't that the same rhetoric that we're hearing from Israel right now against Iran? That Iran has maintained Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis as proxies to fight against the Israeli state. I mean, so I think these are two separate things, and to cast both of them in the light of terrorism, I think is problematic, right? Terrorism might be a word that actually captured the moment right after 9/11 because of what had happened in the United States. It captured everyone's imagination. But I think ever since America has pulled out of the global war on terror by ending its involvement in Afghanistan, I think it's lost some of that cachet on the international stage. Now, I do think that it's easy for India to claim Pakistani culpability because of precedent, right? Because of what happened in 2008 in Mumbai. Because we know that the leaders of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed are still living in Pakistan. We know that they're under minimal surveillance and house arrest. That their movements are not restricted. We also know that Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed in the past have actually carried out attacks against and targeted the Indian state in Indian-occupied Kashmir. So for India to make this claim is very easy. Now, all of the evidence seems to suggest that the Pakistani government is somehow involved, but do we have the irrefutable evidence of everything that the Pakistani government is or was doing when happened?
Yep.
No evidence was produced, right?
Exactly.
But it is easy for India to make the claims that India has made because of what past suggest. And sure.
Very true. Also, even leading up to the war, I saw many Indian military analysts talk about this very same thing that you mentioned, that for Pakistan would have preferred a short and quick war conflict if things did escalate. Whereas for India, it would have been to their benefit to prolong things because of the weakness of Pakistani economy. It would have been difficult for Pakistan to maintain a prolonged war. So given that, why do you think the war was so short and so abrupt, which goes against India's own kind of advantage? Was it that the ceasefire, or so-called ceasefire, because it wasn't a declared war, so it's not an actual ceasefire, but do you think that was kind of enforced on the two sides, or do you think that both sides wanted to stop? And why did India choose to have a shorter war rather than a longer war?
I think the risk of nuclear escalation and the fact that India could not, India could not necessarily predict, based on Pakistan's nuclear doctrine, how the Pakistani government would respond if India kept hammering, through Pakistan's air defense system, might have something to do with it. I think in this particular case, strategic deterrence still works. Okay, mutually assured destruction still works in the context of Pakistan and India. I think that geographical proximity certainly helps in that, right? India continues to maintain a no first use nuclear doctrine. Pakistan, on the other hand, has a much more ambiguous nuclear doctrine, but it does believe in a full spectrum deterrence posture. And what that means is that Pakistan could resort to the use of tactical nuclear weapons, including the Nasser, the Shaheen, or the Babar cruise missiles, along with the PL-15s and the J-10s that it's received from China. But basically, Pakistan believes in calibrated escalation, right? Now, in this particular instance, it wasn't clear what Pakistan's red line was. It wasn't clear if Pakistan will respond in a way that India will not be willing to put up with, given that domestic considerations are definitely at play when conflicts escalate like this. Yes, India can last it out in a protracted battle, and yes, India would have prevailed had the war continued, and that would have been to its benefit. But at the same time, the costs of war almost always are very, very huge. The other thing I would say is that in this particular instance, both countries escalated horizontally. They did not escalate the conflict vertically, right? They did not resort to the use of nuclear weapons, number one. But what I mean by horizontal escalation is that they continued to attack different sides, and they continued to use unmanned aerial support systems. So they were using drones, and they were not necessarily, sending troops on the ground. They were not necessarily getting into like your conventional tank warfare that has, previously happened between India and Pakistan. So both countries actually maintained that line. It's also interesting to note that the diplomatic channel fired up quite quickly, got activated quite quickly, right? So yes, there's exchange between India and Pakistan May 7th, May 8th, May 9th, but by May 9th, the diplomatic channel was very much in play. J.D. Vance was in touch with Modi. Marco Rubio was calling Pakistan again and again. Like the United States government was basically trying to cool tensions as quickly as they possibly could. And I think that diplomatic back channel was activated, right? In both instances, in India and in Pakistan, domestic politics was a major consideration, right? So for General Asim Munir, who's the chief of army staff in Pakistan, and here is a man who is quite embattled by civilian politicians in the country and was looking for a win so as to strengthen the reputation, the image of the military, and to impose the military's control over civilian political leaders. He was also trying to reclaim some of that, institutional reputation for the military, which took a severe hit after the confrontation with Imran Khan's PTI. So General Asim Munir was also faced with certain domestic considerations. Now in India, Modi was the same. Modi did not get the electoral mandate that he expected in the last election. Here, he is very confident when it comes to the Indian economy, which seems to be doing very well, despite everything else that's going on in the world. And so, although confident, Modi also needs to maintain and continue to maintain a united Hindu nationalist support for whatever kind of escalation that India was going to carry out. So now, had both countries escalated, right? If we even ponder the scenario where both countries had escalated and resorted to using tactical nuclear weapons against each other, the cost-benefit ratio of that use was negative in all scenarios, right? In both cases, India stood to lose a lot on the international world stage. Pakistan's economy is in complete shambles. The Pakistani government cannot have survived this, right? So, in both cases, the cost benefit was negative. And so I think what this conflict showed was that strategic deterrence in the region is still at play, and is still somewhat effective. However, I will say, can there be a miscalculation by either side? A strategic miscalculation by either side? I think the risk of that remains dangerously high.
I think you're absolutely right. Nowhere else in the world would two nuclear powers go head to head in a conflict with each other, let alone two neighboring countries that don't really have that much time to react to what the other country is doing. So it's very easy to misjudge. If they're both lobbing missiles at each other, it's very hard to predict if any of those missiles are have nuclear warheads, for example, on it or not. So, and at the same time, a lot of the channels of communications have been broken between the two countries. So it is complete insanity to try and resolve mutual differences, regardless of whatever the differences are, and whoever starts the conflict. At the end of the day, really doubt that any of these conflicts can be resolved through military campaigns. Whichever side thinks that they're losing, the last option that they have is not a very palatable solution to anyone in the world. It is quite insane.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't disagree with that.
What do you talking about like tactical advantages? From a Pakistani point of view, I think they might disagree that they would think that the tactical advantage was on their end because the fighter jets that they claim to have downed, that India has actually accepted that they have had loss of jets. They've been kind of a bit fuzzy on the details, but in the absence of them providing any details, one can only go by what Pakistan has presented and what India has accepted to a degree. So they shot down like 6, according to Pakistani narrative, they shot down 6 fighter jets from the India side, including 3 Rafale aircrafts, which have never previously been shot down ever. And in addition, they're claiming that they've damaged the Russian anti-air batteries. So from a tactical point of view, for Pakistan, that was a huge achievement. And in some ways, global market backed Pakistan's narrative by the fact that at the time, the stock market, the stock prices for the Rafale jets went down, and the stock prices for Chinese-made J-10s went up. So from a Pakistani point of view, they would probably disagree about the tactical thing. Having said that, I think with any conflict, it's very, very difficult to actually establish who came on top because Russia and Ukraine have been fighting for over 2 years now, but they will both keep claiming that the tactical advantage. I think at the end of the day, everything gets settled on the strategic and the political level. But what do you think about the claims of Pakistan on a tactical level?
Okay, so the Pakistani government claims that it downed 6 fighter jets. I think using third-party evidence and all of the articles that I read, it seems that they actually might have downed 4, including the loss of a Rafale, a Mirage, a MiG-29, and a Sukhoi 30, right? So, I mean, there's reports that and evidence to suggest that that's what Pakistan did manage to achieve. Both countries did resort to using drones to target each other and to carry out precision strikes against each other. So India used Israeli-made drones, including the Searcher, the Heron, the Harpy, the Harap, which all had autonomous reconnaissance and precision strike capability. Pakistan, of course, ended up using Chinese-made CH-4 drones. It also used a number of Turkish made drones, including some indigenous technologies that it also put into play, right? Now, the success that Pakistan had was using the PL-15 missiles and the J-10 fighter craft that had been given to Pakistan by China. It is entirely a possibility that India completely miscalculated Pakistan's capability with respect to using these technologies that it possessed, and absolutely, I think from what the Air Force managed to do in downing the jets, absolutely, that is a bit of a tactical success. But at the same time, all of India's missiles struck something in Pakistan.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. So when it comes to air defense, which is predominantly a Chinese technology that Pakistan was using, India managed to penetrate that, right? On the Indian side, Pakistan was unable to inflict any damage. So both sides incurred losses. Absolutely. India lost some very effective fighter jets, okay, and a number of drones, right? And but Pakistan also lost 44 civilian lives, including women and children. It also incurred some damage on the Noor Khan base and other population centers wherever India managed to hit.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I would counter argue tactical successes. I am certainly not taking away from the fact that the Pakistani Air Force performed extremely well.
Sure.
And, I mean, it surpassed expectations.
Sure. So look, going back to point number 2 out of the 4 that you mentioned at the start of this discussion. So um, the how this time around India didn't limit its strikes in the occupied, the disputed territories of Kashmir, but they kind of struck various different places on the actual border between India and Pakistan. They attacked in Lahore, I think, in Powalpur and some other places. So how do you see the targets that they selected, knowing what you know about the geography and even internal politics about Pakistan? The actual targets that they selected, it didn't seem to me like they were actively being used. They may have been used as bases in the past, but it didn't seem like they were being used for anything useful from that point of view. But what was your take on the targets that were selected, and how good was the intelligence that they based that decision on?
So India claims that it selected sites of terrorist infrastructure, right? And the fact that they attacked Muridke and Bahawalpur and so on, they claim that these were places where, Lashkar-e-Taiba was headquartered and that other terrorist organizations maintained their charitable fronts and so on in Pakistan. Okay, that seems to be the basis for selecting these particular sites. However, India also targeted major population centers, right? Punjab is Pakistan's heartland. About 54% of the population resides in Punjab. Hitting any of these sites would have resulted in loss of civilian life. And they did. All right. As the conflict escalated a little bit to on May 9th, I would say that's when the Noor Khan base was attacked, the one in Rawalpindi. And I think that was more to just signal that India can get very, very close, treacherously close to the Pakistani military's headquarters.
That's interesting, because also I think there were some statements from the Indian foreign minister which didn't go well in India, but he suggested that they informed Pakistan beforehand of the 9 targets that they selected. And they were a little bit surprised and taken aback that they were hoping that Pakistan military would step aside and let India carry out its missions, given that they're not attacking any military targets and they're just targeting what they claim was militant bases. Personally, I think that was very naive to think that they could come and attack inside another country and the government would step aside, the military would step aside because no military bases have been targeted. But secondly, I think it was quite strange how the foreign minister of India reacted, that they were surprised that Pakistan hit back. And that statement inside India hasn't gone very well, that they informed Pakistan beforehand. I think that kind of goes with some of the information I was getting as well, because I had some contacts in some of the areas that got hit on that first day, and they were saying that actually all of the areas were emptied out, and they thought that the government knew beforehand what was going on. So I think there was a little bit of that from both sides, kind of trying to soften the blows and maybe inform each other of what's going on.
Again, like I said, in the fog of war, who's to know what statements are credible and which statements are not, right? Like, I think that is certainly a problem. Now, even if India had informed the Pakistani government, why would the Pakistani government allow another country to impinge its sovereignty, its territorial sovereignty? It doesn't make any sense to me. But beyond that, they targeted 9 sites of so-called terrorist infrastructure. They ended up killing, 44 civilians, including 15 women and children. Out of the people who lost their lives, we don't really know how many of them were the so-called militants that India was in search of or interested in targeting. Okay, that there are some claims to suggest that some of the women and children who died were linked to known terrorists. But beyond that, the point is that they were civilians, right? And that nothing really was gained because the optics of it ended up showing what India did as being disproportional to what had happened in Pahalgam.
Yeah, a couple of more questions. One thing that I was going to say is that apart from the 4 points that you mentioned, for me, there was a fifth point that I think was quite crucial in this whole thing, which was the role of China. And if you look at past conflicts, all the previous wars that have taken place between India and Pakistan, I can't remember ever a time where China came out so strongly and so openly. It supported Pakistan on a number of occasions. But the way they came out so strongly saying that they're going to back Pakistan's sovereignty and national integrity and all of that, and then back that up by providing missiles that weren't apparently even export quality missiles, but missiles from their own stockpile. And on top of that, intelligence, because I've been listening to like a military intelligence, a very well-respected military intelligence in India, Praveen Swani, and he was saying that in some ways this is a complete new area that we're stepping into, where India's not going to be fighting on two different fronts, but it's going to be a single front, but it's going to be reinforced, which means that there's going to be a constant supply of arms, but also intelligence from China to Pakistan. How do you see that role of China, and do you think that we have witnessed something different that established what they're calling a new norm?
Right. So I think what we witnessed is that Pakistan and China are more than just all-weather allies, right? That China is willing to defend Pakistan because it cannot afford a weakened Pakistan in the region. I think the Chinese government has made tremendous investment in Pakistan by building Gwadar Port, by making it the linchpin of its Belt and Road strategy. And Pakistan for China is geostrategically very, very important, right? It's the country that is right next to Iran, which supplies a lot of China's oil. It is the country through which China hopes to trade using Gwadar Port and the connection all the way to Xinjiang province. Pakistan is also the country that helps China sort of balance India and contain India's regional aspirations. So for all of those reasons, I think China has come out very clearly saying that it cannot afford a weakened Pakistan and that it is going to defend a Pakistan that is attacked. Right. Second, what we witnessed is enhanced military intelligence cooperation between Pakistan and China. Right. The fact that this entire conflict between India and Pakistan ended up being a test of Chinese technologies in real battle was very interesting to see. I mean, China actually saw its weapon systems performing, right? And I think the success of the PL-15s and the J-10 aircraft was a major win for China. Of course, the air defense technology, I think that it's using and has, given to Pakistan was less successful. But I mean, that is neither here nor there. The matter is that Chinese technology is on par with what we're seeing being produced by other countries. China, what's unprecedented also is that China chose a calculated diplomatic role in this entire conflict, right? it was a calculated move for China to say that we will support and defend Pakistan and we will protect Pakistan's territorial sovereignty, something that China has never before said. Right? China has never entered a conflict between India and Pakistan. And I think what India was hoping for was that the United States and Russia would intervene on its behalf in the same way. And India did not get that kind of support from either country. I think, and from that perspective, it really strengthened Pakistan's position vis-a-vis India. I think what was also a win for China was that while India was distracted with Kashmir and dealing with Pakistan, China has continued to make strides with Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Right? All three countries are using China, not using China, but certainly using their enhanced relationship with China to stand up to India. And I think from that perspective, India's aspirations to be the regional hegemon in South Asia are constantly held in check by China's presence.
Yes.
Because none of the countries that India is surrounded by are actually interested in only working with India. They're also increasingly interested in working with China. And that India can ill afford. Right? I mean, certainly India can be part of alliances like the Quad, and it can be part of, and it can be on the receiving end of military technologies from the West, France, Israel, the United States, and so on. But within its own neighborhood, India is actually not in as secure a position as it would like to be. And that is mostly because of China. So the role that China plays and the way it chose to intervene in this particular conflict was unprecedented and certainly interesting. But it just goes to show that the relationship between Pakistan and China is ironclad.
I think absolutely right. And I think it is quite interesting to see how you mentioned in South Asia, it seems like there's no country happy with India at the moment, but it also seems like India's just kind of given up on South Asia and is kind of looking into its relations with the Middle East or with America or Quad and things like this, trying to get more integrated into Western alliances, which is going to, in the medium to long term, I think is going to test India's presence in the BRICS, but also its alignment in Western alliances, strategic and military alliances. I think that's going to be interesting. And also coming up, I believe, in the next BRICS conference, which might be, I think is taking place in Brazil, but I think Russia is said to basically suggest that Pakistan should be included in the BRICS alliance. And I don't think that's going to happen instantly, but it just goes to show there's a lot of shifting alliances going on in the neighborhood. And actually, as kind of India is exiting South Asia strategically, China is stepping in to fill that vacancy. So I think that's going to be very interesting. But in addition, do by all means touch on that if you like, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on Balochistan and that troubled area within Pakistan. I think Pakistan's finding it very difficult to control the unrest in Balochistan. And I think a lot of that is because Pakistan is dealing with it as a military problem that needs a military solution, whereas it's a political problem and the political leadership needs to step in. And I think that's kind of your area of speciality, because this is what you focus on, which is like the military involvement in Pakistani politics.
Right. So before I get to Balochistan, I mean, what I'd like to say, though, is that, yes, India has expanded its foreign policy reach. India definitely wants to have a role in the international stage. And so, yes, it's developed its Look East policy of trying to work with the Southeast Asian emerging economies. It has also at the last G20 summit that was hosted by India, it in a splash, it announced that it would also be working on a network connecting India through the Middle East, Israel to Europe in order to counter the BRI. All of those, and then of course, India also has the Connect Central Asia policy, where it's trying to have a role in Central Asia, although that is very squarely in the hands of Russia and China, not necessarily India. But I think India is trying, right? And India finds itself in an interesting position right now, because in the Middle East, at least, there's no appetite for Indian involvement so long as Israel is front and center in the news as being a source of instability in the region, not just with respect to Gaza, but also with respect to what is happening with Iran. And that sort of brings us to Balochistan, because of course the province of Balochistan in Pakistan borders Iran. And Balochistan is a complicated issue for Pakistan and has been from the get-go, right? Balochistan was one of the princely states. It seceded to Pakistan not at the time of independence in 1947, but a little bit later. It is home to a tribal population, and a number of the Balochi tribes have, for the longest time, been asking for increased provincial autonomy for the province of Balochistan from the central state. The problem of Balochistan is fundamentally a problem of federalism gone wrong in Pakistan, and a lack of recognition given to the rights of the Balochi people. And it's a much longer history that I think we can do an entire other podcast on. So it's very hard to encapsulate right now in our conversation. But you're absolutely right to observe that the way the Pakistani government has handled this is by trying to suppress the insurgency, right? Now, what is this insurgency? This insurgency is about demanding autonomy for Balochistan. Why has that autonomy been threatened? That autonomy is being threatened by the global war on terror that resulted in a lot of population dislocation from the Pashtun belt into Balochistan that resulted in, changing demographics within the province. The second thing that recently happened is, of course, the involvement of foreigners in Balochistan as far as the development of its land resources is concerned, right? So what is happening in Vekodip, for example, which is one of the world's largest deposits of copper and gold, being mined by international players that have been invited, of course, by the central Pakistani government, right? Without taking the provincial government of Balochistan into the discussions. Similarly, the presence of China in building the port of Gwadar, all right, and the increased presence of Chinese engineers, Chinese laborers, and Chinese presence just for the development of the CPEC, right, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So Balochistan feels threatened. The Balochi people feel threatened. They're demanding increased provincial autonomy. They want that the resources that Balochistan has, that the benefits of those resources should actually be felt by the Balochi people themselves. And I think a lot of the problems of Balochistan also stem from the fact that it is the most sparsely populated province of Balochistan, of Pakistan, yet the largest territory. So when it comes to democratic representation, it just doesn't receive any. And its problems are just not paid any attention to. So the insurgents who are fighting for the rights of the Balochi people and Balochistan, who are now also fighting against the extrajudicial killings of the so-called insurgents in Balochistan, of the people that the Pakistani military is targeting and blaming for the unrest in Balochistan, the missing persons the case, and so on. All of that has resulted in an antagonism between the province of Balochistan, the militant groups within Balochistan that are fighting for Balochi rights, and the central state. And the way the state has chosen to respond to all of this instability and unrest is to take on a military solution. We should go after the people of Balochistan and to kill them without due process and to attack them. And that has caused even more issues in Balochistan. Now, the other thing in all of this is that the so-called insurgents, the Balochistan Liberation Army, for example, they are seeking safe haven in neighboring countries like Afghanistan, right? And the Taliban is providing that haven to these individuals. There are also reports of many of these organizations receiving logistical support and funding from India. Now, whereas we heard that same kind of story, right? India saying that the Pakistani government is using proxies in Kashmir to fight back against Indian state targets. Well, where there are reports to suggest that the Indian government is doing the same in Balochistan through the RAW. So the situation in Balochistan continues to be very, very unstable. Now, very recently, Pakistan and Iran almost came to blows because of unrest along the Pakistan-Iran border, which, of course, was claimed later on by insurgents on both sides, and the Pakistani and the Iranian governments tamped down the conflict. But at the same time, right now, though, with Israel attacking Iran, the Pakistani government has actually come out in full support of Iran, saying that we are standing right behind you. This is interesting. This is very, very interesting because, of course, Pakistan is a majority Sunni state and Iran is a majority Shiite state. And never before have we seen this level of unity between Iran and Pakistan. Typically speaking, when we think about the geopolitics of the region, we've always thought of India and Iran being closer to each other than Iran and Pakistan being closer to each other. So all of that seems to be shifting given what's going on right now between Israel and Iran. Statements from Israel to the effect that Pakistan's nuclear arsenal is next after Iran's are also, of course, very troubling for a country like Pakistan. Not to mention that China also has a role to play in Iran, of course, with all of the infrastructural developments that it has carried out in Iran, but also because of the close relationship it maintains with Iran, because Iran is one of the major providers of oil to the Chinese. So the likelihood of Pakistan standing behind Iran and China also for that reason then standing behind Iran is of course very interesting, because there seems to be a complete realignment of alliances in the region. Of course, in the meantime, India has actually been quite silent on Israel's attack on Iran. Because right now, of course, India needs to calculate for itself what its position can possibly be. Because in the past, India has maintained strategic autonomy, has continued to maintain a relationship with Iran just in the same way that it has with Israel. So India also seems to be caught between again, a rock and a hard place. So what's going on with respect to Iran, Pakistan, India, Israel, China, I mean, I think it has less to do with the local instability that we see in Balochistan province, which is more an issue of federalism gone wrong in Pakistan and is a domestic problem that the Pakistani government must resolve by figuring out how it can respect the autonomy of this province, and less to do with the geostrategic geopolitical moves that are happening on the world stage.
You're absolutely right, Mariam. I mean, for us being like a channel that likes to look into matters of geopolitics, I think it's fascinating what's happening, as you mentioned, because, I can't remember a time where Pakistan was so closely aligned and supportive of Iran in the past. Not to mention the fact that China was able to build a lot of bridges between Iran and Saudi Arabia as well, which kind of helps Pakistan somewhat, because Pakistan is very close to Saudi Arabia and now is getting a lot closer to Iran. And this whole building alliance and converging of interest between Russia and China, Russia wanting to establish its North-South corridor, and China wanting to establish its BRI. Both of those things are going to go through Pakistan and Iran. So I think those four countries, I can see establishing a very strong bloc and alliance in future: Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iran. And obviously for Pakistan, the main issue is economy, and that's the Achilles heel that they need to sort out for their own sake, but also for the sake of those nations that are relying on Pakistan to play a role. And then for Iran, the main thing is creating stability within Iran, which is linked to stability in what's going on in the Middle East. But India seems to be one of the only countries in the area that hasn't come out openly and said, talked against the actions of Israel against Iran. And I think going forward, Iran is going to, once this whole thing is over, I think Iran's going to have to reconsider some of its alliances. As you mentioned in the past, both countries, Iran and India, have been very close. India has a lot of investment in Jhabbar port.
In Iran port. Yeah,
Exactly.
port. In Zarakit-Telaram highway that connects Chabahar to Kabul.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So I think this is going to be very interesting because I think India's kind of stuck between its economic interests that are tied with Iran and its strategic interests that are tied with Israel and America. So I think that's playing a really kind of a crucial role in as well. And I'm really looking forward to see how things develop once this war is over in Iran. And I hope that's sooner rather than later for the sake of everyone, especially for the sake of people in Iran who are suffering unduly, really. Mariam, I'm really grateful for your time. It's been really fascinating getting your thoughts on these matters. Obviously, this episode was more to do with geopolitics, but in the future, I'd love to have you back, and maybe we can talk about the hybrid government in Pakistan and talk more about these matters of military involvement in Pakistani politics, business, economy, everything, and also the role of politics that allows the military to take over politics. I think that's going to be really fascinating, and maybe I'd love to have you back one day and we can talk about some of those things as well.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you, Mariam. And I'm really sorry about the technical problems that we were facing. And thanks for your patience. And thank you once again for joining us.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.